everyone. Thanks for joining us today as we stroll down the Fash Avenue. I'm Joan Kelley Walker, and my guest is Canadian designer Lesley Hampton. Lesley, thank you so much for being here. Now, I want to start at the very beginning. Did you always want to be a fashion designer, and how did you get to be where you are now? Because you're a young woman, yet you're very well established in the trenches of design in Canada.
Absolutely. I grew up a lot like some other kids who watched fashion television growing up. I was in Newfoundland at the time, and there wasn't really a fashion scene going on there when I was 10 years old. And then I was lucky enough to travel the world growing up because of my dad's job.
What did he do?
He was in mining. So I was able to go to middle school in Australia and high school in England. And just learning different backgrounds and different stories of all the different people that I met. And then I came back to Canada, and I realized that I really want to kind of bring my travels kind of with me to my fashion design, and really just push for diversity and inclusivity in the fashion industry, because I kind of saw that there was a gap there. And I just wanted to make everyone feel kind of comfortable and confident in their own skin through fashion.
So I've heard you introduce yourself as a First Nations designer. What is that influence, and why is that important to you? I mean, obviously it's important because it's part of your heritage, but you have such a global heritage as well.
Exactly.
And that's so essentially Canadian.
Yeah, so I am part of Tamagami First Nation, which is a reserve based out of Northern Ontario. And I was always connected with my band, but traveling the world and kind of having a different world experience, and then coming back to Canada, I really kind of used my fashion to reconnect with my roots. I was part of Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto, and just meeting kind of my community and feeling involved and reconnecting with those stories and those teachings is really great to do through fashion.
So let's talk about Indigenous Fashion Week in Toronto. This was the first time that happened. And you're really leading the charge for Indigenous women, for Indigenous designers. How was that whole experience of the Indigenous Fashion Week?
Yeah, Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto was incredible, because just the exposure that everyone from all different communities, even remote communities in Northern Canada who possibly didn't have the chance to travel all the way to Toronto, the Fashion Week kind of gave them funding in order to come to this major city and showcase the work. I didn't know that. Good. Yeah, so the organizers of the showcase really kind of brought everyone in and really just put us on a platform that otherwise certain designers wouldn't even be seen. Yeah.
And did you feel like you were mentoring other designers that were there, or were you all learning from each other?
Yeah, I definitely felt kind of more of a learning from everyone in that environment. With my Toronto Women's Fashion Week showcase, I brought some Indigenous Fashion Week designers to accessorize my showcase as well. So it's really great just learning kind of what everyone does and the reasons behind why they create.
Right. So one of the things that I love about your work, and I love about the shows that I've seen, is that you include everybody. You have different ages. You have some women with physical challenges. You have you really think outside the box. All sizes are represented, all colors are represented, all ethnicities are represented, and it all shows so beautifully in your designs. Why are other designers not doing that? And why did you want to take that on in such a powerful way?
Yeah, I honestly don't know why other designers aren't doing it, because it creates a beautiful runway.
And it's reality.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the runway creates kind of a fantasy. And I always say, why can't the fantasy be comfortable with who you are and actually seeing someone who reflects you on the runway? When I was living in Australia growing up, I was the only North American one kind of in that small town I was in. So I kind of felt very kind of segregated and kind of bullied, let's say, for being the different one. And then going to England.
I'm sorry to hear that.
That's okay, yeah. And then going to England, I figured out, I went to an international school there. And so everyone was the odd one out. Everyone had these crazy different backgrounds. So being in going from one extreme to the other, I kind of realized that everyone has these crazy stories in their past, and you need to kind of create a community where everyone feels comfortable with themselves. And I think fashion's a great way to do that because everyone wears clothes. And it's a great personal connection to an individual.
Right. So how do you gather those people? Is it hard to find women that would never expect to find themselves on a runway? Is it hard to convince them, or are they excited to have the opportunity? Wow, I get to be in a Lesley Hampton fashion show.
Yeah, they always seem very excited. Everyone who I reach out to always seems very excited to represent who they are on the runway. And definitely reaching out to agencies depending on what type of person I'm casting. For one of my shows, I casted a lot of mental health advocates, and that was the whole idea around my show. And some people kind of fought back saying like, oh, you're not going to be able to find enough people who are mental health advocates. And I'm like, no, I'm going to prove you wrong. Yeah. They're out there and they need to be shown. And people really need to be supported through fashion. And
also, just as a viewer watching the show, you don't know who's a mental health advocate, who's you don't really know, what anybody's situation is that's modeling. You really are mesmerized by the clothes.
Yeah.
So let's talk more about design. Each collection of yours tells a complete story, and each collection is so unique compared to what we saw last time.
Yeah.
You seem to really turn it over quickly. How does the creative process happen for you?
Yeah, so I think every collection is different. Because I'm such a young designer, I really like to experiment with all my different kind of avenues that I can go in. Being only 24, it's really nice to explore while I still can don't get stuck in a certain way. So it's just fun to kind of experiment with different fabrics and bringing all that along. I really love to start designing a collection based on a concept, and then that translates through the clothing and the cuts and things like that.
Right. So you mentioned you're 24 years old.
Yeah.
But you're such an old soul. Do you hear that all the time?
I don't, but I feel it sometimes.
Yeah. No, I get that from you for sure. Now, because you're 24 years old, if you can look forward, if you had a crystal ball, where do you see yourself, and where do you see your designs in, let's say, 5, 10, 15, 20 years?
Yeah, so I'd love to expand to international retailers. Sid Nygon is a designer who works in my studio space, and just seeing him able to work every day and being such a successful Canadian designer who has international praise is really kind of the path I'd love to follow as well.
So do you have mentors? Would you say that he is actually one of your mentors? Is he helping in that way?
Definitely. Just seeing his work ethic, and a lot of other designers in the Toronto Fashion Incubator where I work out of, seeing their work ethic is really inspiring. And just being able to ask them questions and saying, hey, is this, have you ever gotten this question from an interviewer, or things like that. It's really nice to just bounce off questions that you wouldn't normally have. Yeah.
Right. So people are willing to help.
Yeah.
That's something, it's kind of a common thread through the different conversations I've been having about the fashion industry in Canada, is that people are really willing to help each other, which is,
absolutely.
I think it's kind of unexpected, because you're putting your own creativity out there, and you've worked so hard to get to where you are. Are you willing to share that? So I think it's really beautiful that we are able to do that. So do people come to you for mentorship?
Yeah, as well. A lot of Indigenous designers come to me and say, hey, I have this jewelry line. Can I have it in your show? Because I'm always looking for kind of new talents to collaborate with. So things like that, or even kind of my sewers who work for me, I'm always pushing them towards Fashion Art Toronto or more of these smaller showcases to build themselves as designers.
So you've got sewers, you have a very well-established collection and a following. I always hate to talk about money, but it's a really important element of this. What advice would you give someone that doesn't have the backing, but they have the creativity? How would you guide them into becoming more and more established?
Yeah, so I think a great way for emerging designers to start is definitely doing collaborations with photographers and just image makers to get their work kind of seen by people, and then it translates to smaller sales, and then you could just continue to grow from there. Definitely just collaboration and networking for sure.
Right. Now, how do you there's so many fashion weeks in Toronto. There's so many fashion shows, and there's a lot of opportunity. Absolutely. How do you decide which ones you want to participate in? Because it's a huge expenditure of your time. It uses your resources. It's a lot of energy, and you gotta get all your sewers on board. You gotta get your collaborations on board. It takes a lot of work.
Absolutely. So kind of starting 3 years ago, I started with Fashion Art Toronto, which is a smaller showcase. It was more financially feasible for me at the time, and it was a great kind of platform to figure out how to put on a fashion show, because going from a new designer going straight to, say, Toronto Women's Fashion Week, you don't realize that you have to, there's all this expenditure, as you said, behind that. So the smaller showcases are really great to give a platform for the emerging designers. And then just organizing everything when you do want to do the Toronto Fashion Week or Toronto Women's Fashion Week. It is a lot of organization, and you just, as long as you have your support team behind you, I think a number of people could do it. Yeah.
So who do you need in your support team? I won't mention any names, but I was speaking to another designer, and they were saying, like, I do it all.
Yeah.
I do it all. So who's essential for you to have in your court?
So my PR, my publicist, is very important for me, because my collections, I love to tell stories, and I love to really enforce my ethos of diversity through my fashion. So I think a PR company is great to kind of push that message as wide as possible. Sometimes people need casting directors. I do all that by myself because I am very particular with who I put on my runway, because I want to include kind of a wide variety of bodies and people. So then models, of course, photographers, makeup artists, hairstylists, kind of list goes on, but you kind of have to find who you mesh with well, and then go from there.
So, like, what are we going to see next? What's the next story that you want to tell?
So my next collection, which will be Fall/Winter 19 season, will be regarding the missing and murdered Indigenous women. Reconnecting with my roots.
I'm so happy you're doing that.
Yeah,
I'm going to get all weepy here.
Absolutely.
I really, honestly, not to get political, but I really feel like people aren't doing enough about that, and it's like breaking my heart constantly.
Yeah, so reconnecting with my roots through these last 2-3 years through fashion and being based in Toronto, I really kind of saw there's a gap talking about that conversation, talking about residential schools, and just talking about the indigeneity and the identity that someone who went to someone who was adopted, like, you kind of lose your identity in that, and you know you're Native, but you're not. Might not be Native enough to some people, so it's kind of just the next collection is really in investigating all that identity things, and it's something I struggle with as well, not growing up in the culture and trying to reconnect with it, and my question of, am I Indigenous enough to be putting this story out there? But it just.
And what kind of a reception do you get from the Indigenous world? Like, as you and your words, are you Indigenous enough? But I'm sure they're also just so proud of you and really backing you with all their support, because you're doing such a great job.
So I've asked my community this, and something that's stuck with me a lot is that gatekeeping is a colonial concept. So it's not really something that's in the Indigenous community. It's something like, you're either Indigenous or you're not. Like 50%, and you can do, like, say, a ceremony, but you can't do this other thing. Like, in Indigenous culture has never, Indigenous people have never responded like that to me, and they're just proud that I'm kind of pushing stories and pushing Indigenous people.
Because you could have also just said, okay, I'm going to be a designer, I'm just going to focus on that, and I'm not going to worry about the Indigenous part of you.
Exactly.
When you first heard that there was going to be an Indigenous Fashion Week, what did that mean to you?
I thought it was incredible. At the time, I almost still didn't know what it meant to be Indigenous, because I am still on a discovery path myself. But to have Indigenous Fashion Week and just to bring everyone together and kind of use our voices to explain what Indigenous fashion is. A lot of the time in interviews, I get the question of, how does being Indigenous influence your work? And it always confused me answering that, because I I always thought, oh, I just do evening wear, like being Indigenous doesn't influence that. But my push towards diversity and inclusivity and community is my Indigenous influence. It's making everyone feel comfortable, and I think that's where I get that. And then bringing Indigenous Fashion Week in and just developing that community more was incredible.
Yeah. Plus, I also think in any creative capacity, it's like the whole sum of every experience that you've had and the whole sum of who you are and where you've lived and the influences that you've had. I think that is always part of your creative journey.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk about the industry within Canada. Do you find it's entirely Toronto-centric? Is that a problem? Do you want to reach other places within our country?
So when I started off after my Fashion Art Toronto showcase in 2016, I was invited to Vancouver Fashion Week, and that was kind of my first major platform to showcase my work more on an international scale. Vancouver Fashion Week was great for kind of organizing everything. They organize the models and the PR for you, so you kind of just give them your clothes and they have it all worked out, which is incredible for emerging designers. And then the press was really great for that. I got incredible stories as well. So I think in addition to incredible press and support from Toronto, so I think Canadian fashion is kind of across the country.
You're 24 years old. You don't know a world without social media.
Yeah.
How do you use that platform to further what you're doing?
So I find a lot of my models on social media because I really love to cast people who have a voice and a momentum behind them. So social media is great to kind of give everyone a voice and really say what you want to say, which I guess in the past you weren't able to do because it would have had to be a press story that you got once every so often.
Right.
So it's really nice to communicate that, as well as communicating with your clients and with your supporters firsthand, and just developing the connections.
Speaking of clients, what are the comments that you get that fuels your heart the most from your clients?
Yeah, it's people coming into our studio's changing room, putting on a dress that they've really loved, that it's a designer dress, but maybe they couldn't find it in their size. And then just like the smile and the relief they have where this designer piece fits them and makes them feel incredibly confident. Just to see that response is beautiful.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I can certainly understand that. So thank you so much for speaking with us today. I feel like I could talk to you all day, but I think you're on a great path, and I think being a young woman and such an old soul, and I think you're doing work that is so responsible and so creative. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. And this has been The Fash Avenue. I'm Joan Kelley Walker.